That's for pause. Yeah. All right, here we go. So we're doing the second part of section 1.3. And look at this. This should be familiar to you, shouldn't it? Quadratic equations. We just finished doing that in what? Section 1.2 maybe? Something like that. Right? Didn't we do quadratic equations? We learned how to complete the square. We learned quadratic formula. We learned other stuff, okay? Factoring and all that kind of stuff. But now we're doing quadratic equations. But look what our answer is going to get. We're not just going to get some funky answer with a square root. Guess what we're going to get? We're going to get answers that are what? Talk to me. Complex numbers. Very good. Okay. So that's really the only thing different about today. So if you understood what we did yesterday, if you were here, um, that might have been helpful. But let's take a look. Let's do a little reminder here. Okay. Square root of -1. Remember what the square root of -1 is? It's just the letter I. That's right. Okay. Remember that? Okay. If you don't and you weren't here, go back and watch the video. Okay. It's on there. Let's do this, though. We didn't do this yesterday. What if I had this? That's a little bit different, isn't it? So we want to simplify this. Go ahead. There is an I in it, and there is a 2 in it, but that's not complete. Because the square root of 8 is not 2. You're getting there. Let's take a look at the -8 right now. What I'm going to do, I don't think you need to do this every single time. I'm just doing this for teaching purposes. But what is -8? Well, it's 8 times what? -1. -8 is 8 times -1. Everybody with me so far? Now, you know what the square root of -1 is, right? So if I wanted to, again, I'm doing way too many steps than we really need to do. Most of this we could do in our head, but I'm going to do it anyway. So wouldn't you agree that this is this? Yeah, we break it down into its individual square roots. We've done that before, all right? Back in the review lesson chapter, we broke this down like this, all right? Let's keep going. What is this now? We took it into a -1, square root of -1. So what is the square root of -1? It's an I. So are we just going to leave it the square root of 8 and then I? No, because we can simplify the square root of 8. Remember we did that before? So what is the square root of 8? Well, it's 4 times 2. Don't forget that I. Now, understand this. This is very important. A lot of students get confused on this. That I is now outside of the square root. Do you agree? Because that square root of -1 becomes just an I, and it's now not under a square root anymore. Okay, so make sure you write that. Don't even have that even come that close to this. So I don't even have any feeling that you put it under a square root. All right. So let's simplify this. What's the, I'm doing way too much in our head. I mean, technically, you should, after we do this lesson today, you should be able to go from this straight to the answer. You really should with square root of 8. I'm gonna do every step since I've been doing every step so far. So watch, I got the square root of 4 times 2 is the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. Agreed? Same step as we did right here, from here to here. And now, let's just write this underneath of there. Now we know what the square root of 4 is. What's the square root of 4? It's 2. And then the rest of it, we can't do anything else with it. So we write 2 square root of 2, I. We're going to keep it just like this. Some people put the I out in front. Or they might do this. You might see this, okay? And it's perfectly fine. These are all just being multiplied times each other. It doesn't matter what order you multiply things in. Some teachers prefer to write it one way. Some teachers prefer to write it another way. I'm definitely not going to take off any points or anything on a quiz or a test if you do it like this. But watch, some people like this, 2i and then the square root of 2. You could do that. It's the same exact thing, right? Because you got a 2, you got an I, and you got a square root of 2. Does it matter what order you multiply them? No, it doesn't make any difference. So you could write it like this. Some people like to write it like that. Some people like to write it like this. I don't know who, but some people might like to write it like that. That would be fine. I would accept, uh-oh, what's that? Oh, no wonder it's, well, no. It doesn't need to be. I'm not going, why is it doing this? I'm not doing anything that needs to be on the internet. So anyway, it never did that before. No. Yeah, because I've been recording all this time, like for weeks, without hooking up to the internet. So anyway, I think it's still working. We'll see. If it's not, I'll have to reteach it tonight. Ugh. So it's, but I prefer this way right here. Okay, this is the way I prefer. So right there. Stick the I on the right-hand side and put your numbers on the left-hand side. I think that looks a lot better. Because, for instance, like 3x, you could write it x times 3, couldn't you? But then that kind of looks stupid. Yeah, all right, it's kind of the same way here. Okay, I think it looks kind of weird to put the I on the left. But some people do. Some people like it like that. All right, enough of that. That's just preparation to do what we're going to do right now. We haven't even done any quadratic stuff. So let's do a little bit of quadratic. We're going to start off super easy. And then we're going to get pretty soon, pretty quick, where it gets a little bit more difficult. So this is example 10, and it's A. That was example 9 before. This is example 10, so it's x squared equals 4. Now that's super easy. Okay, we've done this not a million times, but we've done this a lot. And this doesn't even have an I in it. You're close. It's not quite just 2. You're only half right. No, there's no i's involved because there's no negatives. So how do I get rid of that? No. How do I get rid of a square? Take the square root. But now, you remember, it's been pretty recent. What do we do with the square root? We do plus and what? Minus. Okay, why do we do that? You know that x there, that squared and that square root cancel each other out. And this right here is plus or minus what? 2. The reason is because this is all the answers. These are all the solutions. Because if I took a -2 and put it in here and squared it, what would I get? What's -2 times -2? It's positive 4. So would you agree that -2 is one of my answers, or is one of my answers? Yeah, absolutely. So if you just put 2, you've only got half the problem right. You got to put -2 on there. You got to pass? It's on this one? Okay. Everybody with me on that? We did that when we did that quadratic formula. Remember, -b plus or minus square root of blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's important. That's the only reason they put that little example on there, all right? So what I want to show you, and if you look in the book, what does the answer look like in the book? They put a little brace, and they'll put -2 first, comma 2, and then they'll close it. They make it in set notation. They make it look like a set. Some teachers want you to write it like this. I'm perfectly fine if you just write it like that. Okay? If you write it like this, that's perfectly fine as well. You can do that, okay, because that's the way it looks in the back of the book when you're looking at the answers. But I'm okay if you just write it like this. Now, let's do part B. Part B is a little bit different. X squared equals -9. Now, this is a little different because if we just do regular square root, before yesterday, we always said that you can't take the square root of a what kind of number? Of a negative number. But yesterday, we discovered this new number system, okay? It's called the complex number system. And now we know what to do when you take a square root of a negative number. We just did it on that very first example today. Yes, sir?
It's going to be positive 3 and -3.
Close. That's part of it. It's not quite everything. So what am I going to do? I'm going to take the square root, right? Put a plus or minus right there. And then, what did we do on that very first? Remember that square root of -8 we did just a few minutes ago? So let's do this. Let's put plus or minus, and then the square root of 9 times what? -1. Would you agree that's the same thing as -9? Let's not go through every little tiny step, but I will do the important ones. So what I'm going to do is take the square root of 9 and the square root of -1. What's the square root of 9? 3. What's the square root of -1? It's I. That's your answer right there. So it is plus or minus 3, but you got the I there. Why do you have the I? That takes care of that square root of -1. Everybody see that? So when you have a square root of a negative, you're going to have an I as part of your answer. This is an actual answer, okay? But it's a complex number. It's a complex number because it has an I with it. And that's perfectly fine. People work with complex numbers all the time. Does everybody work with complex numbers? Of course not, okay? They don't. But a lot of people do, all right? In order to have these lights, in order to have this computer, okay, with the lights flashing, in order to have anything with electricity, somebody has to know about the complex number system to be able to get all that stuff to work. If you're going to be an electrical engineer, all right, some of you guys might want to be engineers. If you want to be an electrical engineer, You'll probably do a whole lot more with complex numbers. And you can come back, okay, after you become an electrical engineer, come back and tell me how you use complex numbers. Maybe I'll still be here. Okay, maybe not, I don't know. So that's your answer right there. All right, let's do one that's a little more difficult. Again, we're just working our way up to it, right? We're just climbing up the hill. We're not there yet. So let's do another one. Let's try another color. Let's try this light green color. Okay, here we go. This is example 11. I think it's the same numbers in the book because I've been looking at the online version when I'm doing my notes a lot of times. That might be why I had a different example, I don't know, a few weeks ago that happened. Anyway, this says solve. And it says solve by using the quadratic formula. Solve by, I'll just shorten it up, by the quadratic formula. Okay, so we know what the quadratic formula is, don't we? So let's take a look at what the question is. It's x squared minus 4x plus 8 equals 0. All right. It looks like it'd be a nice little easy factoring problem, doesn't it? But if you tried to find something that factors, you're not going to get anything. All right. So this does not factor. You could complete the square if you wanted to, but that's kind of passe because we learned completing the square so that we could do this formula. So let's do the formula. Let's write it down. X equals. Do you have this memorized? You should, because I'm not going to give it to you on a quiz or a test. So every once in a while, you're going to have to use the quadratic formula, and you're going to have it memorized. So it's negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over what? 2a. Very good. That needs to be memorized. Okay, I don't have you memorize a ton of stuff, but that definitely has to be memorized. All right, that's just got to be right in your back pocket. You got to know it. All right, so let's figure out what our stuff is. Let's put a coefficient in front of this. You don't have to do this, but I like to do this, especially when I'm kind of new to the quadratic formula. I like to write down what my a, b, and c are so that I know what to plug into this little formula. So what's the a? Look over here. What's the a? It's 1. It's the coefficient before each of those terms, okay? So it's the 1. What's the b? It's negative 4, not 4. Always look at the sign in front of it, okay? If it's a minus, then that means it's a negative 4. So put negative 4. And then our c is just positive 8. So that's how we start this thing off, okay? So whenever you do a quadratic formula, that's what I would do. I would write down the formula, write down my a, b, and c, and now we just plug and chug, all right? So x equals negative b. This means the opposite of b. Well, b is negative 4. What's the opposite of negative 4? It's positive 4. So we put a positive 4 right there. A lot of people look at this, a lot of students in the past, Mr. Hamrick says that has to be negative. Well, it means the opposite of whatever b is. If b happens to be negative, the opposite of a negative is a positive. Everybody with me? All right. Square root b squared. So we take that b again, and we got to square it. So remember, it's not just negative 4 then squared. Can you please send DJ and Billy to the office for a moment? Okay. Thank you. Right in the middle of my math class. All right, let's do b squared. So b is negative 4. You don't do this. That's not b squared, because that's only squaring the what? If I write it like this, what's that only squaring? The 4. It's not squaring the negative. How do I show that it's squaring the negative? I got to put it in parentheses. Everybody with me? So this is negative 4 times negative 4, which is what? Positive 16. Okay, that's really important. That's a mistake a lot of people make. They'll put negative 16, but it's not. You're squaring a negative, so it's negative times negative. All right, let's keep going. Minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 8. Let's extend that a little bit. Over 2 times a, or 2 times 1. Okay? Everybody with me? Thank you. All right, now we just simplify this thing and figure out what it is. So it's just arithmetic. If you wanted to use a calculator, I guess you could, but this works out kind of nice. So this is 16 minus 4 times 1 times 8. What's 4 times 8? 32 over 2 times 1, which is 2. Let's keep going. 4 plus or minus square root. 16 minus 32. You can do that in your head, can't you? Negative 16 over 2. This right here is where it's different from what we've done before with the quadratic formula. Everybody understand? Why is it different now compared to what we've done in the past? What's different about this? You got a negative inside the square root, okay? Everybody see that? That's why this problem is different than what we've done before. But we've led up to this, okay? We've taken baby steps up to this point, and now we can apply what we've learned to figure out what this is. So it's 4 plus or minus. Let's see if we can do this in our head. So you're going to break this down into the square root of 16 times the square root of negative 1, correct? What's the square root of 16? 4, right? You guys afraid to answer? You just don't know what it is. You should know what the square root of 16 is, right? It's 4, and then the square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of negative 1 is I. That was like the first thing we talked about in yesterday's lesson. Over what? 2. Is that finished? Nah, because I see some stuff can cancel out, don't you? I could rewrite this 4 over 2 plus or minus 4 over 2i. Isn't that the same thing as this? Okay, because this is over 2 and this is over 2, right? And then 4 divided by 2, that's easy. Plus or minus, don't forget that. And then 4 over 2, again, 2, and then the I, and that is your answer. So that's what x is equal to. So really, this problem was no different than what we did before when we did quadratic formula, is it? It's really no different, except for that little I thing. And was that I really that much more difficult? Not really. Okay, once you learn how to take that negative out of the square root and turn it into an I, it's really not that bad. So complex numbers aren't all that different. Yes, sir. Yes. All right, do I have another example? I think there's another one. Nope, that's it. Check that out. I told you today was a little bit quick. Just go. So here's your homework. I'm going to put this in red. You have it on your lesson plan thing if you grabbed one of those. But I'll write it down anyway for the people that don't have it. And it's page 117. And we're doing 50. Oh, I said I was going to collect the homework, and I didn't. My goodness. 71 odds. Nah, I tell you what, we have some time. Would you say quarter of? 45, quarter of. You guys know quarter of? I forgot. I said that to my kids last year, and they're like, Mr. Hamrick, we don't know what you're saying. Like, it's a quarter of an hour until the hour, basically, is what that is. Quarter of. You've never heard that before? Have you? Okay. All right. Let's stop recording, and then we'll go through some homework now. We got 15 minutes, okay? So let's do some homework problems for you, but I'm not going to record it.